Suya. This is one of the most recognizable street foods on the African continent. And for anyone who has grown up in West Africa, the smell of it cooking over an open flame at dusk is one of the defining sensory memories of the region. Suya is spiced meat on a skewer, usually beef, though chicken, liver, and kidney versions are common, rubbed in a dry spice blend called yaji that typically contains ground roasted peanuts, ginger, paprika, garlic, and a collection of spices that varies by the seller and is often treated as a closely guarded recipe. The meat is sliced thin, threaded onto long metal skewers and grilled over charcoal at high heat until the outside chars slightly and the spice crust caramelizes. It is served wrapped in newspaper or on a flat board with raw sliced onion and tomato alongside. Suya originates with the Hausa people of northern Nigeria and Niger, where it has been prepared and sold by traveling meat sellers called Maize for generations. Today, it is found across Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Senegal, and beyond, and it has become one of the few West African street foods that has traveled internationally with any real recognition.
Rolex. Despite the name, this has nothing to do with a watch. The Rolex is Uganda's most beloved street food, found at every roadside market, bus stop, and town center across the country. And it is one of those foods that achieves something remarkable. It is simultaneously a complete breakfast, a quick lunch, and a late-night meal, depending entirely on when you encounter it. The name is believed to be a contraction of rolled eggs, which is exactly what it is at its core. A chapati, thin, flaky, slightly chewy, is cooked fresh on a flat iron griddle. And onto that chapati goes a beaten egg omelet that has been fried with tomatoes, onions, cabbage, and sometimes green pepper. The egg sets around and onto the chapati. The whole thing is rolled tightly, and it is handed over wrapped in paper. Some vendors add avocado, sausage, or more vegetables. The chapati itself came to Uganda through South Asian communities who arrived during the colonial period, and whose culinary influence became so deeply embedded in Ugandan food culture that the chapati is now considered entirely local. The Rolex is the specific evolution that Uganda made its own.
Akara. Akara is a fried bean cake found across West Africa under different names and in slightly different forms, depending on where you are standing. In Nigeria, it is called Akara. In Senegal, it is known as Akara. In Ghana, it appears as koose. And in Brazil, where it arrived with enslaved West Africans and took root so deeply it became part of the national food culture, it is called acarajé. The base is always the same. Black-eyed peas soaked in water until the skins loosen and can be rubbed away, then ground into a smooth paste with onion and seasoning, beaten until the batter is light and slightly aerated, and dropped by the spoonful into hot palm oil or vegetable oil, where it puffs and fries to a crisp golden exterior with a soft interior. In Nigeria, akara is a morning food, sold by women at the roadside alongside oji, a thin fermented corn porridge from before sunrise. The combination of hot akara and cold oji is one of the most consistent morning meals in southwestern Nigeria. That the same food exists in Brazil, sold from large clay pots by candomblé practitioners in Salvador de Bahia, and carrying deep religious significance, is one of the most direct culinary lines between West Africa and the African diaspora anywhere in the world.
Mandazi. Mandazi is the fried dough of East Africa. And while fried dough exists in some form in nearly every food culture on Earth, the Mandazi has a character that is entirely its own. It is made from a yeasted or baking powder leavened dough, enriched with coconut milk and flavored with cardamom, occasionally also with ginger or cinnamon, cut into triangles or rounds and deep fried until golden and slightly hollow inside. The cardamom flavor is the defining characteristic that sets it apart from similar fried doughs elsewhere. It connects Mandazi to the long history of trade and cultural exchange along the East African coast, where Arab, Indian, and Persian merchants arrived across centuries and left permanent marks on the food, language, and architecture of the region. Mandazi is found throughout Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and the coastal areas of Mozambique, and it functions as a breakfast food eaten alongside tea, a snack at any hour, or a light accompaniment to a main meal. In coastal Kenya and Tanzania, the Swahili version is sometimes called mahamri and is enriched further with coconut cream, giving it a slightly sweeter, more tender crumb than the inland versions.
Braai. Braai is not a single food, but a method and a culture so embedded in southern African life, particularly in South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana, that it is essentially inseparable from the social fabric of those countries. At its most basic, it is meat grilled over wood or charcoal, but describing it that way understates what a braai actually is. The wood matters. Hardwood coals rather than the quick heat of briquettes, the fire built and managed with care, the timing of when to place the meat determined by the cook and debated by everyone present. Boerewors is the sausage most associated with the braai, a thick coiled sausage of beef and pork, or beef alone, heavily spiced with coriander, cloves, nutmeg, and vinegar, with a casing that chars and splits at the grill. Alongside it, you might find sosatis, which are spiced meat skewers of Cape Malay origin, marinated in a curry apricot sauce, or chicken pieces rubbed in peri-peri. As street food specifically, braai appears at roadside stalls and informal markets, where a vendor manages a large grilled grill over coals, selling boerewors rolls, the sausage in a soft white roll with fried onions on top, which function as South Africa's equivalent of fast food, eaten standing up at a market. Biltong. Biltong is dried cured meat, and while dried meat exists across cultures globally, biltong occupies a unique position in Southern African food culture as both a snack food and a deeply emotional cultural signifier. It is made from thick strips of beef or game meat, including kudu, springbok, or ostrich, cured in salt and vinegar, coated in spices that typically include coriander, black pepper, and sometimes brown sugar, and hung to air dry for several days until the exterior is firm and the interior ranges from moist and dark red to completely dry, depending on preference. The coriander spice crust is what most distinguishes it from beef jerky, which uses a different curing method and flavor profile. Biltong traces back to the dried meat traditions of indigenous Southern African peoples and was adopted and modified by Dutch settlers in the 17th century who needed a way to preserve meat during long overland journeys. Today, it is sold in dedicated biltong shops, supermarkets, petrol stations, and roadside stalls across South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. And among Southern African diaspora communities worldwide, it functions as one of the most consistent connections to home.
Samosas. Samosas arrived in East Africa through the sustained presence of Indian and South Asian communities who came as traders, laborers, and settlers over many centuries. And what happened next is the story of how a food can travel across an ocean and become so thoroughly embedded in a new place that it stops feeling foreign entirely. The East African samosa, found in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Ethiopia, is a fried triangular pastry filled with spiced minced meat, onions, and green chili, sealed at the edges and deep fried until the thin pastry shell is crisp and blistered. The pastry is different from the South Asian version, thinner, crispier, folded into a tighter triangle, and the filling tends to be drier and more intensely spiced with East African flavor profiles. In Kenya, samosas are sold everywhere, from roadside carts to small restaurants to supermarket snack counters, and they function as the default quick snack at any hour of the day. In Ethiopia, the equivalent is called Sambusa, is often made with a lentil filling, and is particularly associated with the Muslim community during Ramadan, when it is eaten at iftar alongside soup to break the fast.
Puff puff. Puff puff is the simplest and most democratic street food in West Africa. Simple ingredients, simple process, immediate result, universally loved. It is a yeasted dough ball, sweetened with sugar and sometimes flavored with nutmeg, dropped by the spoonful into hot oil and fried until it puffs into an irregular sphere, golden all over and slightly crisp outside with a soft, almost bread-like interior. Unlike accara, which requires soaking and grinding, puff puff needs only flour,
yeast, sugar, water, and time for the dough to rise. It is sold in polythene bags at school gates, at motor parks, at evening markets, from large basins carried on the head, from roadside stalls with a pot of oil permanently on the fire. In Nigeria, it is called puff-puff. In Cameroon, it is simply beignets. In Liberia, a similar version exists under the same name. In Ghana, a comparable fried dough called bofrit is eaten at funerals and celebrations. The food itself is almost the same across all of these places. What changes is the context in which it appears and the specific moments of life it accompanies.
Nyama Choma. Nyama Choma means roasted meat in Swahili, and in Kenya especially, it is more than a food. It is a social institution. Goat is the most traditional choice, though beef is common, and the preparation is deliberately minimal. The meat is seasoned simply with salt, sometimes rubbed with a little oil, and roasted slowly over charcoal until the outside chars and the inside is cooked through, but still retains moisture. The simplicity is the point. Nyama Choma is not about complex seasoning or elaborate preparation. It is about quality meat, a well-managed fire, and time. It is eaten with the hands, torn from the bone, dipped in kachumbari, a fresh salad of diced tomato, onion, and chili with lemon juice, and accompanied by ugali, the firm maize porridge that is the staple starch of East Africa. Nyama Choma joints range from informal roadside establishments with plastic chairs and metal tables to dedicated restaurants where the meat is selected by the customer from a display and weighed before cooking. In Kenya, it is the food eaten to mark celebrations, reunions, and significant moments. A salary received, a guest honored, a deal concluded.
Injera with street toppings. Injera is the foundation of Ethiopian and Eritrean food culture. A large, thin, spongy, fermented flatbread made from teff flour, cooked on a large circular clay griddle called a matad, with a texture that is simultaneously soft and slightly sour, and covered in small bubbles from the fermentation. As a street food specifically, injera appears in rolled or folded form, sold from roadside stalls and small market vendors, filled or topped with a portion of shiro, a thick spiced chickpea or broad bean flour stew, or tibs, small pieces of sautéed spiced meat, or simply with a spoonful of berbere spiced sauce. The sourness of the injera against the spiced filling is the fundamental flavor principle of Ethiopian eating, and even in its simplest street form, that balance is present. Teff is a grain native to the Ethiopian highlands and has been cultivated there for thousands of years, making injera one of the oldest continuously eaten foods in the world in the region where it originated. The fermentation process, which takes several days, is started by keeping a small portion of the previous batch as a starter, a practice that in some households continues an unbroken fermentation lineage across generations.
Thieboudienne. Thieboudienne is the national dish of Senegal, and across West Africa, it is widely considered one of the great rice dishes of the world. Though in its street and informal form, it appears served from large communal pots in market stalls and neighborhood cookhouses at lunchtime. The name comes from the Wolof words for rice and fish, Thieboudienne. And at its core, it is exactly that. Rice cooked in a rich tomato-based broth flavored with fermented fish paste called gedge, stuffed whole fish, usually chaff, a firm white sea bass, and a combination of vegetables including cassava, carrot, cabbage, eggplant, and okra. The rice absorbs the broth as it cooks and takes on a deep reddish-brown color from the tomato paste and the fermented fish flavor that permeates everything. A crust forms at the bottom of the pot, called hoon, which is considered the best part and is served separately to those who are given preference. Thieboudienne is believed to have been formalized as a dish by a cook named Pindum Bai in the city of St. Louis in the 19th century, which is an unusually specific origin for a dish of this scale, and makes it one of the few major West African foods with a credited inventor.
Mahalabia. Mahalabia is a milk pudding sold as a street dessert across North Africa, particularly in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco. Smooth, cold, lightly perfumed with rose water or orange blossom water, and set to a delicate, trembling consistency somewhere between a panna cotta and a blancmange. It is made from whole milk thickened with cornstarch or rice flour, sweetened with sugar, poured into small cups or bowls while hot, and left to set as it cools. Street versions are typically topped with a drizzle of clear rose syrup that tints the white surface pale pink, and scattered with crushed pistachios or shredded coconut. The dessert has roots that extend back through Arab culinary tradition to medieval times. Versions of it appear in cookbooks from the Abbasid period, making it one of the oldest continuously prepared desserts in the region. In Egypt, it is sold from refrigerated display cases outside small sweet shops in the evening when the heat of the day has passed and people are walking and buying desserts from the street in the particular way that Egyptian evenings have always been organized.
Roasted maize. Roasted maize is the most universal street food across sub-Saharan Africa, the one thing that appears in some form from Dakar to Nairobi to Johannesburg to Kinshasa, on every roadside, at every traffic junction, outside every market. A whole ear of maize, husk removed, is placed directly onto a charcoal grill and turned slowly by hand until the kernels blister and blacken in patches, the natural sugars caramelizing in the heat. Some vendors rub the hot cob with a mixture of lemon juice, salt, and chili powder at the moment of serving. The maize varieties used for roasting across Africa tend to be starchier and less sweet than the sweet corn familiar in European and North American markets. The texture is firmer, the flavor more savory, and the slight char from the grill is essential rather than incidental. It costs almost nothing. It requires almost nothing to prepare, and it has been sold at African roadsides for as long as maize has been growing on the continent, which dates to the arrival of the crop from the Americas in the 16th century through Portuguese trade routes. In that time, it moved from a foreign grain to the most fundamental street food presence on the continent, which says something about how quickly a food can become inseparable from a place when the conditions are right.